Thanks to everybody for being here. I hope everybody's staying warm and coping with the elements. I'm not sure snow removal on the sidewalks is one of the DC's best known skills, is from what my experience is, but so far I haven't fallen yet, so I'm good about that. So today we will continue our discussion on the need to modernize our federal environmental review and permitting process. I'd like to begin by thanking my colleagues who are here with me, and in particular Ranking Member Whitehouse for their drive to elevate problems and our current permitting regime and to work constructively together. It's what we need to do. Over the past year, we have all discussed how the existing structure pits uncertainty and the misapplication and abuse of our laws against American prosperity. We've had fruitful discussions, yet we are now a year older. Sometimes it's the never-ending story on permitting, but we're gonna get an end to that story, I hope. And we are still seeking common ground on practical and durable solutions. If Congress can deliver these critical solutions, we will unleash the investment required to build American infrastructure, unlock the supply of essential commodities and materials, grow our manufacturing, improve affordability by lowering prices, and create economic opportunity across our entire country. Without congressional action, we will continue to see the pattern of the last 2 decades. Each new administration will reverse the policies of the last, eroding trust of American businesses and workers, and ensuring we cannot plan or build for either the present or for our future. This is not just speculation. We have all had communities we represent impacted by projects that were delayed or outright canceled by new administrations. I know West Virginia families have experienced this deep disappointment on multiple occasions. So I say to all my colleagues today, I know your pain all the way around, and I want Congress to address it now. Let's remove the politics from permitting once and for all. To do that, we need to think creatively, learn from existing systems failures, and craft solutions to align our permitting laws with that the Americans want and need: affordability, predictability, and opportunity. And we will do so by protecting the air that we breathe, the water that we drink, and the land that we love. We all know that EPW's long tradition of bipartisan legislation is true on tough issues. This is an important reason that I joined this committee when I first was elected to the Senate over a decade ago, and how I approach my role as chairman. I called this hearing with the ranking member with the intent to get us back on the path to fruitful compromise through identifying both the urgent need to act on reform and the scope of priorities we must address. Turning to the policies for permitting reform, my priorities remain largely the same. This legislation must be bipartisan to be successful and durable. This legislation must be project neutral. This legislation must create predictability, consistency, and finality in securing a permit. This legislation must bring accountability to every stage of the process. This legislation must go beyond NEPA to address issues with our core permitting laws and processes. This legislation must include provisions that address judicial review of fully permitted projects. And finally, this legislation must be written in collaboration with our colleagues on the Energy and Natural Resources Committee to address issues within their jurisdiction, and we've been working steadily with them. I've spent the last year listening to the ranking member and the Democrat colleagues as well as to the priorities of the current administration in order to understand what legislative policies would meet each of their stated goals and concerns. I think our goals share more in common than most would admit, and there are many sensible compromises that are in the best interest of the American people to unlock our development, grow our economy, increase supply, and decrease prices in our states and communities. This growing consensus demands action now, or we're likely to miss this once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. The House acted last month by passing bipartisan reforms to NEPA and the Clean Water Act. It is now time for the Senate to act. So we invited these witnesses here today for 2 main reasons. First, they can share with us the pressing need to act this year on reforms and what we will leave on the table if we are unsuccessful. And second, if they can share their invaluable perspectives on the most important reforms to truly unleash America's potential and relieve the economic pressure Americans are facing across the nation. I look forward to making progress with all of you and hearing your insights. Thank you all so much for coming. And with that, I'll turn it over to Ranking Member Whitehouse for his opening statement.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I appreciate your convening today's hearing, a bipartisan hearing on permitting reform. Colleagues have heard me repeatedly state that I want a strong bipartisan permitting reform and that there's a trust problem with the administration's behavior that would need to be solved. Trump's initial executive order declaring an energy emergency but not defining solar or wind even as energy was a bad and irrational start, but we were still willing to work. Then began the unlawful and irrational blockade of offshore wind, leading to a stop work order on the Empire Wind Project off New York, quickly lifted after the governor expressed, and I quote, willingness to move forward on critical pipeline capacity. This all stank, but I remained willing to work on a permitting bill. In August, Stop Work Trump struck again against Revolution Wind off Rhode Island, a project over 80% complete with $4 billion invested, based on supposed national security concerns. That order was instantly thrown out in court as arbitrary and capricious, in part because the Trump administration had been making the opposite arguments about that same project in the same courthouse just weeks earlier. Our New England grid operator warned back then, unpredictable risks and threats to resources that have made significant capital investments, secured necessary permits, and are close to completion will stifle future investments, increase costs to consumers, and undermine the power grid's reliability and the region's economy now and in the future. Consumer cost, grid reliability, and economic security all put arbitrarily and capriciously at risk. Still, we kept working on permitting negotiations. On land, the Interior Secretary wrapped solar and wind projects up in red tape with dozens of new layers of political review, including a stop at his own desk where things have stopped. Since then, only one solar project has received approval. The U.S. Army Corps of Engineers and multiple other federal agencies adopted a made-up and nonsensical energy density metric to prioritize fossil fuel. Still, we kept working on permitting reform. The administration's offshore defeat in court was such a pasting that they did not appeal. That appeals period lapsed in November. Everyone was back to work. We thought the nonsense was over. But no, 30 days later, days before Christmas, they dropped a new stop work order on 5 offshore wind projects, including Empire and Revolution. The new pretext was national security risks that had supposedly emerged in the previous 30 days. That's been reviewed now by 4 federal judges, and the administration went 0 for 4. Not one judge believed them. All along, the Energy and Interior Secretaries were lying nonstop that these projects would raise costs. That is demonstrably false. Grid operators put these projects before fossil fuel in the generation stack because they're less expensive. Revolution Wind, by contract, will put 9 cents per kilowatt hour energy into an 18 cent per kilowatt hour grid. Court filings and affidavits asserted hundreds of millions in consumer cost savings that the administration chose not to deny in court, but they kept lying in public. When federal judges don't believe executive branch pretexts about national security repeatedly, and cabinet secretaries demonstrably lie repeatedly, enough is enough. So Senator Heinrich and I have paused permitting reform negotiations. Let me be clear, we find no fault with Senate Republicans. Chair Capito has been an excellent partner, and I'm grateful both to her and to her team for the quality and tone of the work that has been accomplished. I'm grateful to Whip Barrasso and Leader Thune for how they've responded. This is not Democrat versus Republican. This is legislative versus executive, an age-old drama, in this case with an executive that won't honor its constitutional duty to faithfully execute the law, or, by the way, tell the truth. Make no mistake, the Trump administration's lawless, irrational, and unpredictable attacks loom over every industry. None of it is good for business. The nonsense must stop. I still want to pass bipartisan Senate permitting reform. I know we can expedite the permitting process with sound bipartisan ideas like front-loading stakeholder engagement and disciplining an executive interagency process run amok. We can add jobs and electrons and reduce emissions and waste, but it makes no sense to pass a bipartisan permitting reform that will be illegally butchered by a lawless executive branch, vindictively, irrationally, and dishonestly. The responsibility for resuscitating permitting reform rests now upon the executive branch, upon credible confidence that the nonsense will stop. Plenty of powerful interests need electrons, lots of electrons, and want the low-cost electrons and the abundant electrons that clean energy provides. If that's you, you need to direct your efforts toward ending the lawless nonsense from the administration. If you're fossil fuel and you want this lawless nonsense stopped because you could be next, you'd better tell them so. Proceeding with this bipartisan hearing is our demonstration of hope that the nonsense can be stopped and of trust in our Republican colleagues to get to a good bill, a confidence that I hope is not unjustified. I'll close once again with my appreciation to the chair and to her staff for the helpful, responsible, and honorable way in which they have conducted themselves through all of this. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Whitehouse. So we will now turn to our witnesses for their opening remarks. Our first witness is Brendan Bechtel. He is Chairman and CEO of Bechtel, testifying this morning on behalf of the Business Roundtable. Mr. Bechtel is a member of the Board of Directors of the Business Roundtable and serves as Chair of the Smart Regulation Committee. He is also CEO of Bechtel Corporation, which, by the way, gave my dad his first job in the late 1930s, and is the fifth generation of the Bechtel family to lead the company. Mr. Bechtel, you are recognized for 5 minutes for your opening statement.
Good morning, Chairman Capito, Ranking Member Whitehouse, members of the committee. Thank you for having me today. I'm Brendan Bechtel, Chairman and CEO of Bechtel, one of America's largest engineering and construction firms, and one of the nation's largest employers of both union and non-union craft labor. Over the past 2 years here in the U.S., Bechtel has hired more than 28,000 skilled craft professionals. We anticipate hiring at least 10,000 more this year. Today, I'm here in my capacity as the chair of the Business Roundtable's Smart Regulation Committee. The Business Roundtable is an association of more than 200 CEOs from companies spanning every sector of our economy. Permitting reform is about making America a destination for greater investment, keeping us competitive, strengthening manufacturing and other domestic industry, protecting the environment, and creating good jobs that support our communities. The key to achieving this is comprehensive, bipartisan permitting reform legislation. Congress and the administration have made real progress towards this goal, but there's more to do, and the Business Roundtable is here to help. Every year of delay holds America back. Other countries are building critical infrastructure at speed and scale. Bechtel has seen firsthand what an effective permitting process can do, and we've seen what happens when it doesn't work. Let me share a couple examples from around Bechtel's world. First, the Western Sydney Airport, the first greenfield airport built in Australia in 3 decades. From site designation to final approval, permitting took less than 3 years. 3 years. We started construction after permits were issued and finished 7 months ahead of schedule. Let's turn to Canada and the Kiosk hydroelectric project, creating nearly 700 megawatts of clean power. The environmental licensing process took about 2.5 years. This included extensive consultation with 4 Manitoba First Nations who are development partners and engaged from the very beginning of the project. Canada's review process moved efficiently through public hearings and regulatory approvals. Now, let's contrast that with the United States. Last summer, a study by McKinsey found it takes between 4 and 5 years for the average investment dollar to get through our federal permitting process. That means that right now, as much as $1.5 trillion in potential investments are stalled in the queue, waiting for permits across 8 key sectors. Once permits are issued for major projects, 28% of those are litigated, delaying those projects for an average of 4.2 years, while at the end of that delay, 80% of those permits still ultimately stand as issued by the agency. Meanwhile, Americans aren't seeing the jobs, the spending, or the growth that these projects would and should be generating. The opportunity cost for our nation is staggering. The unrealized induced GDP impact of these delays, up to $2.4 trillion. Equally concerning, our global competitors are advancing critical infrastructure projects faster. China is one of them, and other countries seeking long-term foreign infrastructure partners are taking notice. In strategic sectors like nuclear energy, semiconductor manufacturing, and AI infrastructure, our permitting process could not only jeopardize American economic leadership, but undermine our hard-won global influence. In September 2025, Business Roundtable released our report, Building a Prosperous Future, with detailed recommendations for fixing this broken system. This report is included in my submitted testimony. These recommendations provide clarity and transparency. They remove unnecessary overlap and redundancy. They establish more predictable timelines. And they make clear that strong environmental protections and efficient permitting are not in conflict. I look forward to discussing these policy solutions in more detail today. I'm optimistic because the momentum is real. There is bipartisan agreement that action is needed. The President has made permitting reform a top priority, and Congress has shown a real willingness to move forward, and we thank you for the opportunity to be here today talking about it. Business Roundtable is ready to work with you on legislation that creates a permitting system that is efficient, predictable, and yields durable results. This is our opportunity this year to reassert American industrial leadership and harness the ingenuity that built this country over the past 250 years, ensuring we continue to lead in the world for the next 250. Thank you, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Next, we'll hear from Brent Booker, the General President of LIUNA, the Laborers International Union of North America. Mr. Booker has the distinct honor of having testified twice before this committee during the 119th Congress, and we want to welcome him back again today to share a perspective on these issues from the point of view of labor. So, Mr. Booker, thanks for joining us again.
Good morning. Thank you. Good morning, Chairman Capito, Ranking Member Whitehouse, and members of the committee. Thank you for the opportunity to appear before you once again to discuss permitting reform on behalf of the more than 530,000 skilled and dedicated members of the Laborers International Union in North America. LIUNA members are the backbone of America's infrastructure. We build and maintain this nation's highways, roads, bridges, and tunnels. We construct schools, hospitals, arenas, and skyscrapers. And we build and support America's energy infrastructure, which includes wind, solar, nuclear, hydro, and pipelines. Simply put, LIUNA builds America. And LIUNA members take pride not only in the work we do, but in the communities we serve. Yet today, far too much of that work is being stalled, delayed, or canceled altogether. For decades, outdated permitting laws have been weaponized to obstruct critical infrastructure. Projects, regardless of size, now take years longer than necessary to receive their approval. For stakeholders, these delays show up as numbers on a spreadsheet, but for LIUNA members, that means another day without a paycheck, another day without earning health care eligibility, another day without a pension credit. When these projects are delayed or halted, livelihoods are put on hold. Across the country, particularly in the energy sector, Projects that are fully permitted, fully financed, and ready to begin construction are routinely derailed by endless litigation. A project can be approved one day and tied up in court the next. In far too many cases, developers now spend more time in court than it would to take our members to physically build the project. That is why LIUNA has supported permitting reform for more than a decade, including the House's recently passed SPEED Act. It addresses some of our issues on permitting reform, most notably, proper judicial review timelines. However, while the House was able to advance some elements of project certainty, it ultimately was watered down in order to appease a small group of extremists who don't understand the importance of project certainty. Significant barriers within the permitting process remain unresolved. One of the most persistent is Section 401 water quality certification. States should be required to issue a clear yes or no decision within a defined time frame. If a project meets the standards, it should be approved. If it does not, the state should deny the application, explain the deficiencies, and allow the applicant to correct them and reapply. We believe projects can move forward without sacrificing worker safety, community protections, or environmental standards. But any permitting reform must also address two glaring failures in our current system: project certainty at the highest level and energy transmission. What good is permitting generation if we cannot connect power to the grid? Without transmission reform in conjunction to permitting, energy projects, no matter how clean or necessary, will remain stranded. That reality threatens reliability, affordability, and job creation. When I testified before this committee last year, I spoke about project deniers and serial litigators who exploit procedural loopholes to stop construction. But today, the greatest threat to project certainty is not litigation alone, it's also the politics being played with our members' jobs. Unfortunately, this administration has eliminated and threatened to eliminate thousands of construction jobs, in some cases, just days before Christmas. We have seen the canceling of funding from the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, the halting of Inflation Reduction Act projects, and the use of executive authority to revoke permits from already approved, privately financed infrastructure projects. This is not leadership, this is chaos. These actions raise a fundamental question for this committee. What good is permitting reform if any project, no matter how far along, can be shut down at the stroke of a pen? Nowhere is this clearer than in offshore wind, where we have seen the halting of offshore lease sales, which have upended the industry and forced projects to withdraw construction plans entirely. In 2022, I was proud to have helped negotiate and implement the National Offshore Wind Agreement. This was a historic and monumental agreement that would have delivered thousands of high-quality union jobs across the country. Now, many of those projects built under that agreement are being halted and terminated. As I said earlier, for our members, this isn't politics. These are paychecks. These are healthcare hours. These are retirement credits. This issue is bigger than politics. It's about global competitiveness. It's about energy security. It's about ensuring the United States leads, not lags, in the future of energy production, all energy production. And most importantly, it's about ensuring that working people have access to middle-class careers, family-sustaining wages, and secure retirements. LIUNA urges this committee to seize this moment, not for symbolic reform, but for real, durable permitting reform that allows projects to move forward, protects communities, and keeps Americans working. Thank you for the opportunity to testify.
Thank you, Mr. Booker. Next, we will hear from Dustin Meyer. Mr. Meyer is the Senior Vice President of Policy Economics and Regulatory Affairs for the American Petroleum Institute, or API, where he leads the policy team for oil and gas advocacy. Prior to his promotion to this role in 2023, Mr. Meyer led API's effort on domestic and global natural gas markets, as well as natural gas technology and innovation, including renewable and differentiated natural gas, hydrogen, and the use of carbon capture in the power sector. Mr. Meyer, welcome. You're recognized for your opening statement.
Chair Capito, Ranking Member Whitehouse, and members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to testify today. My name is Dustin Meyer. I'm Senior Vice President of Policy Economics and Regulatory Affairs at the American Petroleum Institute. I want to start with the basic reality that frames our view on the need for permitting reform. Energy demand is growing, and it's growing faster than our ability to build the infrastructure to meet it. Whether you care most about affordability, reliability, national security, or emissions reductions, the conclusion is the same. Our country must be able to build big things, but cannot do so because our permitting process is so fundamentally broken. When infrastructure projects are delayed, constrained, or don't have certainty, costs go up, and it is ultimately American consumers and workers who pay the price. That is why comprehensive permitting reform is our industry's top legislative priority, and we are eager to work with both parties across this committee, the rest of the Senate, the House of Representatives, and the administration to get it done. The federal permitting process directly affects our industry in many ways, including interstate natural gas pipelines, resource development on federal lands and waters, LNG exports, and cross-border infrastructure, just to name a few. Unfortunately, the last few decades have seen numerous examples of permitting processes being weaponized against oil and gas. We've had canceled pipelines, a pause on LNG permits, delayed lease sales, and blocked projects at the state level. Even projects with minimal environmental impacts and strong local support remain in regulatory limbo for years. Further, these obstacles do nothing to enhance environmental outcomes. Instead, they reflect a misguided opposition to any infrastructure being built at all, or assume that restricting oil and gas supply will somehow eliminate demand or reduce emissions. But it does neither. It merely results in higher prices, more volatility, and crises. When our industry talks about permitting reform, we are not starting from scratch. Our priorities are long-standing and well-defined. First, judicial reform. Litigation is now a primary driver of delay. Venue shopping and open-ended injunctions create uncertainty that no project can withstand. We need clear statutes of limitation, defined standards of review, standing limited to directly affected parties, and remand, not vacature, as the default remedy. Second, NEPA reform. NEPA was designed to inform decisions, not stall them indefinitely. Reviews routinely extend far beyond the federal action at issue, producing delay without better environmental outcomes. Reviews should be focused, timely, and lead to an actual decision. Principles unanimously reaffirmed by the Supreme Court in 7 counties. Congress should codify these principles. Third, Clean Water Act reform, especially Sections 401 and 404. Section 401 has been weaponized by states to block major interstate natural gas pipelines, delaying billions in investment and driving higher energy costs across entire regions. Reviews should be limited to direct water quality impacts, procedural delays and gamesmanship should be prohibited, and FERC's authority should be strengthened. Separately, the Section 404 nationwide permit program is a practical, widely used tool. API supports House legislation to extend the permit terms to 10 years, to codify nationwide permit 12, to clarify that a single permit is needed for linear projects, and to modernize consultation requirements. In addition to these long-standing permitting priorities, API joins a broad coalition in supporting provisions providing greater certainty and durability to permits. Even after a fully completed environmental review process, our industry has experienced arbitrary permit suspensions or revocations driven by political or policy shifts. Several of the policy recommendations above foster greater permit durability on their own, but reform should clarify that projects that have completed all required environmental reviews and remain in compliance should not be subject to these unpredictable outcomes. The need for bold and durable permitting reform is not ideological, and it is not limited to any one industry or technology. API's recommended reforms restore focus, discipline, and accountability to a system that has become paralyzed. They reflect respect for environmental protection, the rule of law, and the need for decisions that endure. And done correctly, it will enable us to build the infrastructure of the future. Thank you, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Meyer. Our next witness is Abigail Ross Hopper. She has served as president and CEO of Solar Energy Industries SEIA, since 2017. She previously serves as the director of the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management during the Obama administration and as a senior energy roles for the state of Maryland. This Friday marks her last day with the organization. So we want to welcome the organization's interim CEO, which I believe is Darren Van Hoff, who is also here with us today. If you want to raise your hand there, Darren, there he is. So, Ms. Hopper, thank you for spending your last week here with us. We are very happy to have you, and please proceed with your opening statement. Thank you.
Thank you. I can't imagine anywhere else I'd rather be. Thank you, Chairman Capito, Ranking Member Whitehouse, and members of the committee for inviting me here today to testify on why now is the moment to address permitting in the United States. As you just heard, my name is Abigail Ross Hopper. I am the outgoing president and CEO of the Solar Energy Industries Association. We are the national trade association representing America's solar and storage industry. America's solar companies are manufacturing and deploying the power we need to keep the lights on and keep prices affordable. To ensure a reliable grid and put downward pressure on prices, permitting reform is essential. SEIA strongly supports these bipartisan efforts to improve the process for energy and transmission projects. Permitting reform must begin with this basic principle. Projects that enter the federal permitting process must be allowed to move through that process in good faith and without unfair treatment based on energy source. And once a project receives a permit, that permit should be honored. Unfortunately, the federal permitting process has lost credibility regarding solar projects. In a July 15, 2025 memorandum, the Department of the Interior created 68 new layers of red tape, effectively amounting to a moratorium on solar by requiring political and secretarial level approval for even minor project reviews. Many solar applications remain paralyzed inside the agency, leaving developers in the dark about whether their projects will ever be considered. Political roadblocks are endangering 70 gigawatts of solar and 42 gigawatts of battery storage projects on both federal and private land, according to the EIA numbers released late Monday. These projects represent 43% of all planned new power capacity in the United States. We all know electricity demand is rising rapidly, and without this power and the grid infrastructure to deliver it, electricity prices will continue to rise. In December, the House passed the SPEED Act, which would modernize NEPA to accelerate permitting and prevent unnecessary litigation. While NEPA reform is necessary, I should note that delays on solar projects from NEPA litigation are minimal compared to some of my colleagues. And while the SPEED Act included a bipartisan provision to protect already permitted projects, SEIA could not support the bill because it did not provide meaningful assurance that federal agencies will fairly consider solar applications moving forward. SEIA is eager to work with Congress on a bipartisan basis on permitting reform that unlocks dozens of gigawatts of solar storage and transmission. To achieve this, reforms must include these three core principles. Number one, ending the federal solar moratorium with statutory protections for existing permits and prohibitions on prospective discriminatory treatment. Two, establishing certainty and reducing timelines through streamlined coordinated reviews. And three, accelerating transmission build-out through stronger planning, permitting authority, and grid modernization. The U.S. solar industry has transformed rapidly in recent years. In 2025 alone, the United States added 17.7 gigawatts of solar module manufacturing capacity, and we now produce every major component of the solar module supply chain here in this country. Demand for solar is incredibly strong, with 250 gigawatts of new solar capacity forecast to come online through 2030. But these projects represent billions in private capital that cannot reach final investment decisions without permitting certainty. We all know the United States needs more power. Data centers, domestic manufacturing, AI are among the largest drivers of that energy demand, and that power needs to be built now. Solar and storage can meet that timeline, complementing natural gas and nuclear projects that typically take longer to develop and build. And we all know that the United States is experiencing an affordability crisis. The most effective way to address that is through greater build-out of solar and storage. Unsubsidized solar is now the cheapest source of electricity in history in much of the country. With no fuel costs, solar provides a hedge against natural gas price volatility that continues to cause electricity price spikes. The only way to put downward pressure on prices is bring more power online, not less. States with higher levels of deployment of solar and storage, like Texas, are experiencing lower and more stable electricity prices. Streamlining permitting is essential to addressing the energy affordability crisis American households and businesses are facing. Permitting dysfunction also directly impacts American workers, as you heard a moment ago. We support hundreds of thousands of jobs across construction, manufacturing, and skilled trades. Uncertainty delays hiring, disrupts workforce planning, and puts domestic manufacturing at risk. We are ready to work with Congress on a comprehensive permitting solution. The resources, workforce, and capital are ready. Permitting certainty is the key. The time to act is now. Thank you.
Thank you. And our final witness, we are joined by David Terry, who's president of the National Association of State Energy Officials. Mr. Terry is a true expert on the challenges facing our state energy officials. This marks 30 years since he started his first job at NASAO, spending the last 17 as head of the organization. I understand you talked with our energy person in West Virginia just this week in anticipation of the hearing, so thank you for that. You are now recognized for your opening statement.
Thank you, Chairman Capito, Ranking Member Whitehouse, and members of the committee for the opportunity to testify today. I'm David Terry, President of the National Association of State Energy Officials. We represent all 56 state and territory energy offices across the country dealing with a wide variety of energy issues and have a great interest in federal permitting reform. NASAO strongly supports federal permitting reform and environmental review improvements. The National Governors Association also provided a letter to this committee last fall, and we also want to agree with and endorse their comments. America's economic growth is both exciting and a huge challenge for the energy industry and for the states. I think that the opportunity to optimize the grid, other fuel systems, energy systems writ large, and expand them is critical for the nation's economic future and our national energy security. Addressing affordability is equally important. We hear that from all of our members across the country, as many of you have. Lengthy and unpredictable federal permitting outcomes makes meeting our energy challenges more expensive and leaves the private sector investments and state actions stranded and untapped, whereas they could deliver tremendous benefits to the country. Governors and state energy offices also recognize the importance of streamlining permitting that they control in their own states and have been working together to address those issues and also address affordability. NASAO recommends durable, technology-neutral or project-neutral approaches to permitting reform. The SPEED Act, as it came out of the House Natural Resources Committee, is a step forward. However, we do have concern that an amendment that was added on the floor may put into question technology-neutral and all of the above approaches. I want to stress a few recommendations that NASAO would like to put forward. First, expansion of categorical exclusions under NEPA can speed the environmental review process. Deference to states where there's equivalent processes to NEPA can also benefit reform efforts. Enhanced certainty for approved permits to continue on a technology-neutral basis with strong rebuttable presumption for previously approved permits is essential. Adequate federal staffing to conduct environmental reviews that are needed so that they are not deemed defective by the courts or seen as ineffective by the public. Finally, enhanced state, federal, and interstate cooperation should include state energy offices, the Environmental Protection Agency, Department of Energy, Department of Interior, and other federal agencies. For example, the state energy offices have an excellent working relationship with the Department of Energy's Office of Electricity and CSER office, the office undertaking energy security measures. They've been working hand in glove 24/7 this past week as we've gone through the recent winter storms, working with the industry and having good outcomes. Another great example is the recent state coordination among governors in the PJM region on a bipartisan basis with the Trump administration. That agreement, I think, shows great promise. The state energy offices in this region were critical in moving that activity forward. NASAO recognizes that a commitment to a bipartisan permitting reform is necessary for your efforts to succeed. We stand ready to help the committee, inform the committee, and engage with our state members to help move this process forward. We applaud the chair and ranking member for your leadership in working together, and we're pleased to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you very much, Mr. Terry. Thank all of you for your opening statements, and I will kick off my questions really for the panel. We see a lot of consistency across all segments of what the testimony has been. What we've seen in administrations as they come in during that transitional period, depending on what their political priorities might be, we've seen disruptions in the permits that have already been issued, and that's what we're seeing with the Rhode Island projects and others. So I think all of these projects have gone on, whether it's the MVP pipeline or others, have gone through the permitting processes and were already under construction, some of them almost at completion phase. So I'll start with you, Mr. Bechtel. Could you briefly address how the lack of uncertainty in the permitting process and the treatment of properly awarded permits during presidential transition periods can hurt your investment planning and, in turn, consumers and households economy-wide?
Thank you, Chairman Capito, for the excellent question. Yes, uncertainty disrupts workforce planning, investment, communities, and families. My colleague and friend, Mr. Booker, spoke about that, particularly on the workforce side. Predictability matters for all of these constituents in the process. And I think it's fair to say that rather than any one project, this is about how the whole system works, including what happens after a permit is issued and what happens with litigation. Something that Brent can speak to as well is that for these kinds of projects, in our case, for example, we're typically making investments in training and hiring and partnering with vocational schools in the area, doing housing studies ahead of time to make sure we mitigate impacts on local housing for big projects. That all can happen 18 to 36 months before a shovel ever goes in the ground. And so unpredictability about when we need to get started on that work is a real issue, which is why, again, the BRT's primary goals around this are efficient, predictable, and a durable result that stands after the permit has been issued.
Yeah, let me ask you a quick follow-up question on that. You cited 2 projects in your opening statements, one in Australia, one in Canada. You're a worldwide company. Are there any other countries that have to live with the unpredictability of already permitted projects getting yanked because of political priorities? Does this happen everywhere else or not really?
I'm trying to think of examples of other countries. I will point out, I deliberately picked the Australia-Canada examples because I don't think any of us would say those are countries that cut corners when it comes to environmental and social protections. And so I think they're leading examples that you can achieve efficiency, speed, scale, while really having important community engagement and environmental protections up front in the process.
Mr. Booker, if you could frame the question on the uncertainty, what does this do with the worker? I think you did it when you were here before. I remember quite well your impassioned statements on, that means I'm not working, I'm not getting paid.
Yeah, I mean, that's the bottom line, is that it takes time to get the skills you need, whether it's building offshore wind, whether it's building a pipeline, a natural gas power plant, a nuclear plant, whatever the energy source is, it's actual people who have to go build that and have to apply skills to do that. And it's our job to partner with our contractor partners to create registered training apprenticeship systems to get the skill sets that are needed to produce a skilled craftsman to build that project safely. And when a project is built and it's being built, when it's financed, whether it's privately or publicly financed, it's permitted, people move. Our workforce is transient in some cases. A lot of times it's local as well, but they will move to that job, move their family, because they know they have a 2, 3, 4-year job to build that energy infrastructure. And to have the whim of somebody with a pen in their hand to say, you know what, I don't like that energy source, completely disrupts their life, their livelihood, their family's livelihood.
Right, thank you. Mr. Meyer?
Yeah, thank you for the question, Madam Senator. From our industry's perspective, we're eager to deploy billions of dollars of capital to build these major infrastructure projects, and we face a real gauntlet to bring them to completion. Everybody agrees that there should be a robust environmental review system, but what really challenges the industry is when you get approval, but the approval does not equal finality, or even when you are in compliance, that does not end litigation, and we have a long history of several examples of projects meeting exactly that fate, and it really complicates and prevents our ability to build the infrastructure in the first place.
So basically what you're saying is the uncertainty and unpredictability that possibly could come from political priorities, if you load that on top of the judicial review piece, almost becomes an unbearable load in some cases.
That's absolutely right. It's a challenge not just for projects that are going through the process, but it chills the decision even to propose new projects.
Right, and as we heard Mr. Bechtel say, $2.4 trillion is ready to be deployed. Ms. Hopper.
Thank you. I think I will agree with everything my colleagues said and add sort of the impact on consumers, right? So regardless of whether it happens prior to approval, or especially if it happens after, those electrons are baked into the grid planning. And if those go away, we all know what happens. Our prices go up, right? Because there's a scarcity of a really much needed commodity. And so the impact on homeowners, on businesses, on all of us is pretty impactful if these projects are no longer either not approved in the first place, or even more egregiously, permits are pulled.
Right, Mr. Terry?
I think in a couple of ways, and certainly agree with all the other witnesses' comments. I think from a state perspective, the energy offices are deeply engaged in grid planning, energy system planning, delivered fuels, et cetera. When they look out at their resources, both natural resources, human resources, and how they can deliver reliable energy in their state, how they can help their governors and legislatures make this happen from an affordability perspective, the unpredictable nature of federal permitting is essentially a hidden tax. As the delays happen, that's certainly true for large organizations, hyperscalers, et cetera, we read so much about, but for individual homeowners, for farmers, for small businesses, consumers, many of whom don't have resources, that hidden tax we don't really tally. And I think that's something we're missing in addition to the obvious national competitiveness and security issues.
All right, thank you. Senator Whitehouse.
Thanks very much, Chairman, and thanks to all of you for being here. Some of the backdrop to this hearing is that China, since January of 2022, has added more to its grid than the entire US grid as it exists. So if we're in a race, it's hard to see how we're winning. And if we're in a race, it's probably in clean energy technologies. So backing out of that race is even more dangerous. This is a vital issue. My friend Martin Heinrich points out that there are 2.6 terawatts of power out there waiting to come on the grid if we could sort out the permitting and connection issues. So thank you for the important and unified voice that all of you have brought here as a panel. I want to drill down just a little bit and let you know why I think it's so important that we solve the problems of interagency process and of early stakeholder engagement. Interagency process is obviously necessary. They should coordinate. But in my view, after watching the executive branch for a long time, the weeds have grown in the garden of interagency process. And it is now a place in the executive branch where incompetence and inertia and indolence go to hide, and where turf battles between agencies left unresolved create a lasting squabble that slows down the whole process. We are going to try to clean that up. Front-loading stakeholder engagement is, to me, pretty key. We helped get the first offshore wind onto the grid with Deepwater off of Block Island. We did it because we started with all of the stakeholders in the room before even a filing. Cape Wind tried it the other way. They went into the boxing ring and they put on their gloves and said, we'll take on anybody who comes. And of course, people kept coming. And they went out of business. Vineyard Wind started the same way. It followed the Cape Wind model. And it got so tangled up that they've had to swap management, and now Avangrid is running it much more sensibly and efficiently. Another thing about the Rhode Island process, the state permitting process for that was conducted so well that I was able to go to the Secretary of the Interior and say, don't start a new process. Just look at how good a job the state did. And if that's enough, give us a sign off. And she did. So that's a good example, I think, of what you've been talking about honoring well-done state regulation. Last, y'all got to start showing up more over the other end of Pennsylvania Avenue. If you think offshore wind blockading is lawful, okay, come talk to me and explain to me why you think that's so. If you think that its costs are higher than the existing grid costs, that it's not going to come in low in the generation stack and reduce costs for customers and for businesses, come tell me that. Make the case, because I don't think that's true, and I don't think it's arguable even. And if you think that solar projects should stall indefinitely on the Secretary's desk sort of one-person interagency process delay, come and tell me that and explain your position. But if you don't think that those are right, then you got to talk to the administration. And that means your organizations, that means your CEOs. They got to show up. They can show up privately, but they've got to show up. And of course, the people with the most urgent need for electrons are the AI data farms folks, and they need to start showing up. As you all know, they were not here at all when we tried to protect clean energy in the, what I call the billionaires bill. And now they're barely showing up. But they've got a big voice, and it matters to them to have abundant, inexpensive electrons if they're going to succeed in international competition for artificial intelligence. So I'm delighted that the chair has brought this panel together. It is an extremely wide array of views about many matters. So the fact that we're hearing such harmony today is very significant to me. But I think it's really important that you understand that I don't think you have a problem in this room. I think your problem is at the other end of Pennsylvania Avenue, and it's very, very hard to accept the kind of behavior that's going on now that is patently illegal, repeatedly illegal. Statements are made that are patently false, and behavior at the cabinet level of just grabbing permits and stalling them, just making them sit on the desk. I mean, somehow we've got to fix that and move forward. So I really look forward to working with all of you and with my colleagues here on the committee to get that done.
Senator Curtis.
Thank you, Chairman, and thank you, Ranking Member, and to our witnesses. This truly is impressive. We have business, we have labor, we have traditional energy sources, new energy sources, and the states represented. And it couldn't be clearer that this committee recognizes the immense value of permitting reform. And I think it's fair to say everybody in this room agrees that the status quo is just not working. Projects that are clearly in the public interest are taking years or even decades to move from concept to completion, not because they failed to meet environmental standards, but because the process itself has become unpredictable, duplicative, and vulnerable to endless delays. That reality has consequences. When energy infrastructure is delayed, it affects reliability, affordability, and our ability to meet the growing demand. When housing projects are delayed, families face higher rents, longer commutes, and these are challenges Utahns experience every day. Permitting never was meant to be a barrier on its own. It was intended to ensure sound decision-making, public input, and environmental stewardship, all within a reasonable and transparent time frame. Too often, it delivers none of those outcomes. There are still elements of the permitting process that require a physical rubber stamp. And I've enjoyed working with Senator Kelly on the E-Permit Act to digitalize permitting approvals. There are many common sense updates that could provide greater certainty for project developers and communities they serve. Another critical element of permitting reform is certainty. And I feel strongly that no project should have to worry that it will be halted at the whim of an administration. We've seen that in 2021 with Keystone XL Pipeline, and we see it today with wind projects across the country. It raises questions. How can we expect sustained investment in infrastructure without certainty? I actually believe one of the most critical areas impacts rural America and a big part of my state. We should be honest that permitting reform is not about choosing between environmental standards and development. I believe that's a false choice. It's about recognizing that a process that drags on indefinitely serves neither. Environmental outcomes are not improved when projects stall for years without resolution, and communities are not helped when needed infrastructure is never built. Streamlining does not mean cutting corners. It means focusing analysis on what actually matters, coordinating agencies so applications are not bounced from one office to another, and holding the federal government to the same standard of accountability we expect from sponsors of projects. So let me start, Mr. Booker, with labor. You've articulated well, and some of the questions have been asked about how this impacts you. I'd like to ask, in particular, the swing that you get, between administrations, how that impacts planning, training, and the things that you work with retention and recruiting. And if you have any expertise, especially in rural America, how we're seeing that impact.
Right. Thank you for the question. And look, I'm in a unique position that I actually negotiated Keystone XL pipeline and I negotiated offshore wind. So I've got.
Both your fault.
So, well, I mean.
So it's your fault.
I didn't think of it that way. I probably should have kept my mouth shut on that. We shouldn't have energy projects become political. And I think that's what the purpose of this committee is. And our members, when they vote, when they go cast their ballot, they don't cast their ballot to lose their job. And that happened both in 2020 and that happened in 2024. And that's the stuff that we have to get rid of. To your question on rural and on training, we go out into those communities. That's what I'm proud of, is to go out and meet with those community leaders, those church leaders, and those communities to bring people in. And whether that's the skills they need to build a pipeline or the skills and certifications they need for offshore wind, we have to go identify those. We have to go meet with your constituents, bring them in with our contractor partners, give them those skill sets, and then put them out to work through apprenticeship and through journeyman training. So we have to have predictability. We have to have certainty that these projects, once permitted, are going to be built, because it takes a while to build a pipeline or to build a wind farm or a solar farm. So the predictability is key here.
Thank you. Mr. Bechtel, could you address the same, the way this impacts business and investment, these swings, these wide positions, that go back and forth? Tell us how that's impacting you and investment and your business.
Yeah, Senator Curtis, it's a really important point. I'll frame it from a competitiveness perspective, both abroad and within the United States. Capital is mobile. It's going to go to wherever uncertainty is lowest. The current system undermines our competitiveness abroad and at home. And of course, in the era of artificial intelligence and the national security implications of winning that race, we're basically shooting ourselves in the foot if we can't build power fast enough to provide the power needed to win that race.
Yeah, thank you. I'm out of time, but let me just make a point, and I'd love to ask you too about it, but I'm out of time, Mr. Meyer and Ms. Hooper. Just the obvious fact that this impacts price. You talked about consumers, but just let's be very, very clear. The consumers are paying dramatically for this. And Mr. Terry, also out of time, but if I had more time, I would love to explore what we could be doing to give states more authority and more responsibility in this. And as we have additional hearings, we'd love to explore those topics with all of you. Thank you. I yield my time.
Thank you. Senator Blunt Rochester.
Thank you, Chairman Capito and Ranking Member Whitehouse, for holding this bipartisan hearing on permitting reform. And thank you to the witnesses for attending today. This is about our national competitiveness, our national security. It's about jobs, and it's about consumers who can't afford the high cost of energy today. And as we've heard from my colleagues today, any serious permitting conversation needs to address the Trump administration's attack on clean energy, from the offshore wind stop orders to the clawback of billions of dollars for clean energy and decarbonization projects. This assault on clean energy has to end, and our energy projects need permitting certainty. As the second smallest state in the country, Delaware ranks last in energy production often. We produce only a fraction of the energy that we consume, making my state reliant on outside sources to meet our growing energy demands. Ms. Hopper, why is the opportunity to transition to locally produced clean energy, such as solar and wind, so important to a state like mine?
Good morning. It's good to see you.
Good to see you, too.
And thank you for that question. It is really important that we have all the tools at our disposal and we can utilize them. So distributed energy, things like solar on someone's home, solar in a community, solar on many of the corporates' rooftops, means that there's less electron highway, right, to get from the place where the energy is generated to the person that uses it. Less transmission is needed. And that matters because it's less cost, right? We all know, I mean, we talked about PJM, you talked about PJM a moment ago. Those transmission prices and those like peak prices are incredibly expensive. And so local energy makes a huge difference to the consumer.
And Mr. Terry, just to follow up on that, why is producing its own energy, no matter what the source, crucial to a state?
I think that's a fundamental principle of our energy office members. They do energy planning around all resources, not just regulated electricity, but fuels, grid, solar, wind, hydropower, natural gas, et cetera. And I think the ability for a state to use what is local adds value. I remember working a decade or two ago with Governor Branstad in Iowa, who had very much that view of value add to the resources in his state, in Iowa, much as you're looking for that in Rhode Island.
No, that was Delaware. We're the second smallest.
Delaware,
Yeah.
sorry, I know that.
Yeah. Yes. So my
Both is true.
my staff and I have just heard repeatedly, just like we've heard here today, just the importance of permitting certainty. Not only is it crucial that the executive branch not revoke permits from energy projects of any type following approval, but it's important that there are retroactive protections for permit holders. This is a yes or no question. I'm going to go down the panel, and I hope it's an easy one for all of you. Do you agree that regardless of administration, permitting certainty is necessary for leaseholders and those seeking leases? Mr. Bechtel.
Yes.
Thank you. Mr. Booker.
Yes.
Meyer.
Yes, ma'am, we do.
Ms. Hopper.
Yes.
Mr. Terry.
Yes.
And Ms. Hopper, why is retroactivity certainty for fully permitted projects so important? And what are the economic consequences of selective reopenings of prior permit approvals?
Yeah, I mean, it's fairly catastrophic. And if you look at it both from the investors and the developers who are building it, who are represented all along this panel, they have put their capital at risk, right? They have investors that are awaiting returns. And so stopping work or pulling the permit puts all of that in disarray. And then you think about the consumers, right? The people like you and I that are just want to turn our lights on at the end of the day when we get home. And those electrons are likely no longer to be there. And we really need to listen to the grid operators who are saying this has a significant impact. So investment decisions get less clear, prices go up, consumers are really out of luck.
You know, I know all of you are aware that Delaware is a member of the PJM interconnection. For those who don't know, a regional transmission organization that has forecasted steep increases in energy demand across the PJM region. And a recent American Clean Power report found that without new clean energy projects, energy rates in Delaware will increase by as much as 95%. 95%. By 2032. This report was alarming to me, and I'm sure it's equally alarming to other PJM states like West Virginia that also are poised to see skyrocketing prices. What type of energy efficiency, Mr. Terry, what kind of efforts should be included in a permitting package to help alleviate the growing demand?
I think several pieces come to mind. First of all, certainly technology-neutral approach to make sure the right resources, low-cost and reliable resources. From an efficiency perspective, it's a variety of things. Grid optimization, efficiency technologies for transmission, distribution systems, and use efficiency technologies. All of these pieces can come together to bring down cost, or at least let the increases not be as great. We have a great deal of modernization to do of the grid. Those investments should be done with that efficiency, technology, innovation in mind.
And if there are any other members of the panel that want to add on to that question about what should be included in a package. Anyone else? Well, I will yield back the no time that I have left.
Before I go to Senator Kramer, Mr. Terry, when you answer the questions, you kind of turn if you could just put the microphone a little bit closer to your mouth, that we could hear you a little bit better. So, Senator Kramer.
Thank you, Madam Chair and Senator Whitehouse. One of Kramer's convictions is, I refuse the notion that every transaction in this town requires a loser. And I think you're demonstrating that we can have winners all around. And let's hope that we as a committee can successfully provide that for you. One of the things that the government does really well is screws up the alignment of incentives. And in this case, we have an opportunity to line up all the incentives for the right thing. I have to say, Ms. Ross Hopper, first of all, thank you for emphasizing. I noticed a little extra emphasis on when you said, when you referred to non-subsidized energy, solar energy. And it's an important point, I think, because we're here not to talk about other policy. We're here to talk about the permitting process, whatever the energy source is, whoever paid for it. We've dealt with the subsidy side of some things previously. And so I think I feel good about where we're heading, and you're all really good witnesses to that. Now, I'm going to ask a question that was, well, first of all, I want to speak for a minute to Clean Water Act and 401 permits, because I think you brought up, Mr. Meyer. Help me understand how the new Trump WOTUS rule to comply with SACIT, how does that affect, how helpful can that be? And I honestly am just curious about your response.
Yeah, Senator, that's a great question. So it's definitely a step in the right directions and something that we're very supportive of, but ultimately it falls short of what we really need, which is a legislative fix to the way that Section 401 under the Clean Water Act has historically been weaponized, especially against interstate natural gas pipelines. So very supportive of it. It's a step in the right direction, but we need a lot more, and that's why it's such a high priority for us in comprehensive permitting reform.
Perfectly said. Mr. Bechtel, do you want to add anything to that from your perspective?
Just to add that the reason BRT has been so focused for over a decade on bipartisan permitting reform legislation is because that's what's required for the results to be durable. Executive actions are great, they're helpful, but of course they can be unwound by the next administration.
I would say, however, it does seem that with each generation, every time the Supreme Court speaks, we get closer to something that's durable. But important points. Thank you. I want to talk now about something that hasn't been talked a lot about. It's been referenced, partly because it's not all in our jurisdiction. The importance of linear permitting is obvious for infrastructure, and certainly electric transmission lines are part of that. However, there's this other part of transmission lines that relates to, of course, back in my days when I was with the state of North Dakota on the Public Service Commission, and cited by the way the original Keystone pipeline through North Dakota worked with a lot of your members, Mr. Booker, and the company. We started that process really early too. And by the way, it wasn't even the hearings they were fascinating and they were interesting and they were very full. What was more interesting was the earlier part of the process where we went to communities and they laid out all the maps and all the smart people worked around the room. And I'll never forget the mayor of Park River, North Dakota going, I'm not sure, but I do think if you moved this pipeline a few miles to the east or the west, you could avoid the aquifer that provides all the water for our community. Smart move. And they fixed it before we had the hearing. The best was my farmer friend who showed up and said, I've never built a pipeline before, but it seems to me going through this quarry where we get a lot of gravel is not the best idea. A few miles to this side and you could avoid that. Two great, brilliant ideas that came from two normal people. I loved it. So you're right. Starting earlier, I think what Senator Whitehouse talked about in terms of interagency, role of states, all important. But on electricity, the large issue of cost allocation is and is going to continue to be a stumbling block if we don't find some common ground between utilities and ratepayers, and we can cite the infrastructure permitted, I suppose, and states, of course, have to play a major role in that. Anybody have a brilliant thought? Maybe start with you, Mr. Terry, given you obviously have a broad view of all of this. How we can get there?
Yeah, I think it's an excellent question. The cost allocation issue, I think there clearly needs to be some more flexibility provided to FERC while respecting state jurisdiction and state roles. I don't think that there is an easy answer. One of the things that we have recommended at NASIO to both our state members and the Department of Energy on this topic is to make sure we have economic analyses that show the benefit to the state's consumers, not just from a rate perspective, but the overall economic benefit. And we think that there is something in that process to help inform the decisions both the state regulators are making and federal regulators are making that go beyond rates to additional value that we see.
Very good. Thank you. Thank you.
Senator Padilla.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Colleagues, as I brag about from time to time, as the only member of both this committee and the Energy and Natural Resources Committee, I see this from all vantage points and agree that nothing could be more important than for the future of our energy availability, reliability, and affordability than securing a permitting reform package that has been talked about not just this year, but for years and has eluded us a little bit. The package that came through ENR last session on a bipartisan basis, I think has become a good starting point for a lot of these conversations. I want to echo my colleague, Senator Whitehouse, the ranking member of this committee, and his desire to bring something meaningful forward. We've got to get past this administration's selective and unilateral cancellation of projects to restore the goodwill and good faith in those conversations. Now, to the witnesses before us, in July, the Interior Department issued a memo escalating 68 different project reviews to the secretary level. In effect, what were once upon a time routine agency actions now requiring the secretary's personal approval. And just some examples of what those 68 projects included, things like cable burial risk assessments, historic property management plans, supplemental environmental reports. These reviews are tying up critical generation and storage in what is now red tape and politics. Questions for Mr. Meyer. Do you believe we should be reducing the political involvement in agencies' energy project permitting reviews or increasing it?
I think it absolutely makes sense to streamline agency reviews. I'm not close enough to the specific issue that you're referencing to really comment on it, but I know that our industry has routinely advocated to make sure that we have a streamlined and clarified approach to make sure that we can develop the resources that
So
we need
from
to
that
develop.
industry perspective, do you think it's helpful for the Secretary of the Interior to have to sign off on what most people would consider routine reviews on energy projects?
Again, I understand the concern. I'm not close enough to that specific issue to really make an educated comment on it, but I do understand the concern.
So if a cabinet secretary has to approve every step along the permitting process for projects, does that slow down or expedite final approvals?
Again, I would defer to other witnesses on the panel in terms of understanding the actual impacts on those industries.
All right, let me ask a couple questions then of Ms. Hopper. The Department of the Interior's directives and stop work orders that I referenced earlier are effectively stalling over 100 gigawatts of energy projects that could be connected to the grid and help us meet our growing demand for energy. In your testimony, you say that applications are disappearing inside the Department of Interior and that developers can't even get a clear yes or no. What is a statutory protection that you think that you would recommend Congress consider to ensure no future administration can similarly stifle critical energy projects?
Yeah, thank you for bringing this to everyone's attention because it is having a huge and detrimental impact on the industry and on all of us and on rates. I think two things. One is that clarifying where the level of authority lies, right? As you're putting together a permitting package, as you said, many of the things in the Secretary Order of July 15th are sort of decisions that can be made at a much lower level. And so I think clarifying that in legislation would be helpful. I also think in terms of timelines, we've talked a lot about predictability and consistency. Part of what is happening and what you're describing is that things, permits go into the box, you submit them, and you never hear. You never hear what's happening, when it might happen, how it might happen, who's making the decision that it will happen. And that, again, can be clarified with some deadlines and timelines with some accountability, right? There has to be some kind of teeth on those, or else, the timelines don't really matter.
Well, at the risk of going off on a tangent, I know, particularly in the transportation sector, there was a lot of frustration nearly a year ago with the initial hiring freezes, encouraged layoffs, funding clawbacks, the Doge experiment. You had one point of contact to answer your questions or the status of an application one day, and they were completely gone. You had nobody to hear from the next. And I imagine that's having a similar impact here as part of that big box that you described. Now, separately, I know my time is short, Ms. Hopper, you released a statement regarding the House-passed SPEED Act, characterizing it as insufficient and saying that it falls short. Can you explain a little bit more to this committee what you meant by that and how what else we can do to improve that predictability that you rely on?
Absolutely. I think the thing that we thought was not adequately addressed in the SPEED Act is exactly what we're talking about, right? This sort of prospective discriminatory treatment, right? We've heard a lot about the weaponization of the permitting process, and that the SPEED Act does not solve that, right? It did have some bipartisan, with significant holes, element for permits that had already been issued, but nothing that really addressed this sort of overreach of an administration to punish a certain electricity source.
Okay, well, thank you. And at the end of the day, when all this leads to delays is time, time is money, and it's always upon the ratepayers to bear that burden. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Senator Husted.
Thank you, Chairman Capito. I appreciate everybody being here today. Always ask the question, why does it matter? To me, why this matters the most is that if we're going to have a domestic supply chain of the things that are essential to our economic and national security, we've got to get to work. And whether that means pharmaceuticals, rare earth, chips, energy, transmission, infrastructure, AI, all of it requires a great deal of new investment in our nation to be able to do that. And anybody in business knows that time is money, because the longer it takes to do something, the more expensive you make it. The more expensive you make it, the more that cost gets transferred to the consumer out of a necessity to do that. China is considered an engineering society. I recently read this, and we're considered a litigation society. And they go much faster than we do. I'm not suggesting that we want to be like China, because we don't. We want to be responsible, but we also have to compete in a global market. And so, Mr. Bechtel, I know you and certainly your company has done projects all around the world. You have customers all around the world, and I know that you have some pretty important projects in my state, in Ohio. Can you explain to us, because I read the McKinsey study from 2025 said that they will leave $2.5 trillion in capital on the table because of permitting requirements. Explain to us how important you believe that this is for helping America compete.
Thank you, Senator Husted, and thanks for your support in Ohio. Yes, so there's $1.5 trillion in investments currently waiting in the queue for permits. It takes on average 4 to 5 years for every dollar of investment that enters that queue to come out the other side. Doesn't matter whether that's a private dollar or a public taxpayer dollar. If you add all that up, that means that we're losing somewhere between $100 and $140 billion a year in unrealized returns, and that the induced GDP impact of that is about $2.4 trillion a year. I think it was said earlier really well by Senator Kramer. This is an everybody wins situation if we can fix it. America wins, consumers win, workers win, communities, taxpayers win with a permitting system that's efficient, that's predictable, and that yields a durable result that allows us to attract investment from around the world.
And as you're doing projects around the world, just how, particularly in the places that we're having a difficult time competing with, what's the time difference it take you to do a big project in one of those places versus the United States?
It varies widely, sir. We do, at any given point in time, we have about 100 projects in 30 different countries. Every country is a little bit different. I cited some examples earlier of places like Australia and Canada where they're consistently, predictably issuing permits, including very robust environmental protections and community consultations inside of 2 to 3 years. If we could just cut the current 4 to 5 year time in half, that would unlock a tremendous amount of value, which currently is just tied up in the system. Just to put a finer point on this, the cost of living and cost of goods and services impacts of this, it's been said by others, but permit delays they lead to real costs for consumers and taxpayers. If it takes on average 4 to 5 years to get through the permit process, think about that over the last 4 to 5 years, construction costs have on average gone up about 40%. So while your project's waiting for its permit, just add 40% to the cost of your project and then figure out how you're going to pass that on to the ultimate beneficiaries of the project. It's destroying a ton of investor value. It's destroying a ton of taxpayer value. It's a huge opportunity.
So either the
cost.
project doesn't happen because it's too expensive, or the cost gets passed on to the consumer. And Mr. Booker, I want to give you an opportunity to reflect on that because you work with the people who build all these projects. What would it mean in terms of jobs and quality of life for your members?
Well, let me start by saying I wish our members got that 40% raise that he was talking about, the 40%, because they ain't getting 40% raises.
Exactly.
The impact for our members is jobs, and it's their ability to go to work. It's their ability to give their skills to build a chips plant outside of Columbus. And when you see that project gets delayed or projects like that get delayed, as we train our people to get there, and then they have to sit on the sidelines, they don't have health care. They're not getting that pension credit. They're not getting a paycheck because we get paid by the hour. We don't get paid by the job. So it has a huge negative impact with unpredictability and chaos when every owner, every contractor, every developer wants predictability, and every member that I represent wants to know that current job is going to stay safe and that they have a place to go in their next job when they built that infrastructure.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman Capito, for the opportunity. But what we heard here is what others have said earlier. Everybody wins. It's good for America. It's good for American business, and it's good for the American worker. And hope we'll get this done. Thank you.
Senator Also Brooks.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Chair Capito and Ranking Member Whitehouse for holding today's hearing, and certainly want to say thank you as well to all of our witnesses who are here. In Maryland, energy projects, including solar and wind, represent good jobs and work that is critical to meet rapidly growing electricity demand driven by data centers, advanced manufacturing, and electrification across industries. Yet the permitting process at local, state, and federal levels can be cumbersome with lack of certainty around timelines. That uncertainty can impact workers, consumers are facing high utility bills, and states trying to plan for reliability and affordability are really, really struggling. And so I believe it's possible to achieve efficiencies without sacrificing critical environmental protections. Bipartisan permitting reform legislation only makes sense if it can deliver real certainty, both for projects already underway and for those in progress, and if it will be executed faithfully without political interference. And so our goal is to ensure that the federal permitting system works for all types of projects, people, and the environment. So my first question is for Mr. Booker. I know that this was partially covered, but in Maryland and across the country, infrastructure projects mean union jobs, apprenticeship slots, and good wages. And when the federal government halts fully permitted projects, as this administration has done for clean energy projects, workers are the first to feel the impact. So what happens to union workers? What happens to their families when this administration cancels projects that are fully permitted and ready to build?
And I'll start with the Revolution Wind project that was, had started and stopped twice now, where our members were on the water working, building offshore wind for Revolution Wind off the coast of Rhode Island. On December 22nd or 23rd, they got a stop work order. They didn't get a paycheck on December 30th. They were sent home. They didn't have a job. They had to wait for a federal judge to say that you can go back to work, that this was improper. So as we all gathered with our friends and families and enjoyed the year and reflected on the last year, we had members who sat at home wondering if they were going to be able to go back to work. And they get paid by the week. So imagine that uncertainty, imagine that uneasiness that you would have if you wasn't sure when your next paycheck was going to be.
Yeah, and not only those workers, but what about those apprenticeship pipelines, the workforce training, and also the ability to bring the next generation into the building trades? Can you just speak briefly about how those are impacted as well?
Our system is built on earn while you learn. So when you are working, you are graduating each year of your apprenticeship. So when you don't have that job, when you don't have that opportunity, you're not able to graduate to that next level of apprenticeship, earn more wages, get the skill sets you need to continue building this country. So any job type of cancellation, termination, job delay, uncertainty on existing permitted jobs or the next job just means that pipeline gets bogged down and people don't have the ability to continue earning a living for their family.
Thank you. So I want to ask Mr. Terry, just to move quickly to demand and reliability. States like Maryland are facing electricity demand growth driven by data centers, advanced manufacturing, and electrification. Meeting that demand requires new generation and new transmission delivered on predictable timelines. So how serious is the reliability risk when projects to meet this demand are delayed, stalled, or canceled after years of planning and permitting?
An excellent question. It's incredibly serious. As I noted earlier, grid planning, energy system planning from a state perspective is often done by our members. When they project out how resources will come online, things that are needed, engagement with utilities, engagement with independent power producers and delivered fuels industry, when those plans go awry because of permitting delays, whether that's state, federal, or local, it creates a tremendous risk to the system overall. It's very interdependent, our fuels and grid system. So I think it's a tremendous concern.
Thank you. And just finally, regarding federal accountability, Ms. Ross Hopper, my colleagues and I have raised concerns in this committee about the administration's failure to implement laws as Congress intended and directed. This has real consequences on the ground in our states that are worth discussing. So, Ms. Ross Hopper, what are the consequences for our country's energy systems, consumers, and workforce if federal agencies continue to delay, reopen, or cancel projects that have already been approved?
Well, thank you to my home senator for that question. I will echo what others have said, and I will put a finer point on the cost, right? You heard about reliability, which is a huge risk, especially in weather like we're having today or incredibly hot weather. Even if we have rolling brownouts, that's incredibly impactful to especially people with medical needs who need electricity. But in addition, prices continue to go up, right? We are all experiencing that. I feel it when I open my electricity bill. I know others do as well. And so when electrons were supposed to be delivered, and they are no longer available because we weren't able to finish the project, that's more pressure on the system, and prices will go up. So it impacts all of us.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Okay, Senator Bozeman.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Senator Whitehouse, for having this very, very important hearing. And again, as always, your example of working together, leading us together so we can actually accomplish a result, which is so, so very important. Mr. Bechtel, Mr. Terry, this past weekend, as we all know, we've had Winter Storm Fern bring ice and snow, sleet to Arkansas and much of the country. We're grateful for the preparations by our local utilities and linemen. They did a tremendous job, not only in Arkansas, but throughout the country. The Department of Energy provided proactive relief in allowing the use of backup generators, and EPA Administrator Zeldin has also made operational flexibility a priority. I think the question is, do you all have any recommendations for how the EPA can enable more flexibility for backup generation to operate during grid emergencies? And then also, how will comprehensive permitting reform allow for utilities to better prepare for the next emergency? Mr. Terry.
Yeah, happy to respond. And I really commend the linemen, the utility workers, the states, and DOE for having gotten through this last weekend. I think with regard to emergency backup generation, I think cooperation between EPA, the governor's offices, and governor's energy offices and the Department of Energy in these emergency situations to make sure that those generators come on when they're needed, but also to make sure that they're prepared to. So I think that is fundamental cooperation. I'm not sure that that's a permitting reform item. We can get back to you with some more details and suggestions.
Very good. Mr. Terry, with Chairman Westerman's passage of the SPEED Act and Governor Sanders signing energy regulatory reforms into state law, Arkansas is emerging as a national leader in common sense permitting reform, as industries such as technology, lithium, steel, manufacturing, aerospace, defense, and forestry are seeking to set up shop in Arkansas or expand existing operations. How would proposals like the SPEED Act provide regulatory certainty that these projects are viable investments in Arkansas, and how can federal reforms complement state-level efforts to streamline approvals, which we just talked about, the importance of that, allowing the energy grid to meet the demands of the future?
Excellent question. I think a couple of things. One, the kinds of actions we see at the state level, such as Arkansas, this does allow investment to come in. The missing component of federal permitting certainty is critical to that. The SPEED Act, I think, does take a good step forward. However, ensuring that that comes out with certainty around timing, also certainty around technology or project neutrality, I think is important. Lastly, I think the kind of attraction in business that you see in Arkansas and other states that have taken action, these are once-in-a-generation opportunities. If those businesses, manufacturers, et cetera, go overseas, we lose them forever. And I think that's the urgency to this.
Very good. Ms. Ross Hopper. Arkansas is currently seeing major investments in AI and cloud infrastructure, including a multi-billion-dollar data center in Little Rock and West Memphis. Arkansas was able to land these investments in part because of a reliable, affordable, and all of the above energy supply, including solar. What steps should be taken to ensure permitting reform remains technology neutral, encouraging diverse investments in a state like Arkansas?
Thank you for that question. And you have identified one of the things that's happening all across the country, including in Arkansas, is those big data centers are looking to find the electrons as quickly as they can. Solar and storage often are part of the solution. You will never hear me say they need to be 100% of the solution. But what can you do here? You know, you've heard unanimity here around technology neutral, technology agnostic solutions, not weaponizing the permitting system. And I think that means that you have clear timelines, right? So that every project, regardless of the source of the energy, has the same kind of timeline, the same kind of environmental reviews. They'll be different based on the technology, but they should be sort of standard and predictable. And I think kind of being clear about the certainty and the finality of final decisions and final permits is critical. And then lastly, sort of making sure that whomever is in the White House and in the administration does not take the ability to weaponize interagency permitting, right? So that there is some clarity from this body around where those decisions should lie.
Very good.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Senator Markey.
Thank you, Madam Chair, very much. We're holding this hearing because project developers want certainty. Well, if you're looking for uncertainty, all you have to do is to look down the road to 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue. Because since Trump took office nearly 1 year ago, Trump's costly, lawless, and unnecessary war on American clean energy has cost more than 165,000 clean energy jobs, $53 billion in private investment lost, 324 projects across red and blue states killed. Offshore wind has already unleashed billions in investments and created thousands of union jobs across the country. It makes sense for coastal states like Massachusetts, as well as for supply chain states like Texas and Louisiana, Mississippi. But over the past year, Trump has been escalating this increasingly outlandish attack on offshore wind, including cutting off the permitting process for all wind projects on federal lands or water. And on December 22nd, the Trump administration took its most unhinged action yet and yanked the permits for 5 offshore wind projects that are fully permitted and under construction, including Vineyard Wind 1 off the coast of Massachusetts, 800 megawatts. This action fuels rising electricity costs, puts our grid reliability at risk, and as Mr. Booker puts so well, sends thousands of union workers home without pay. So we can't talk about new permitting laws in Congress while the Trump administration refuses to follow the laws which we already have. And if Trump and Secretary Wright and Secretary Burgum will not do so on their own accord, this administration must be forced
to end its punitive treatment through clear legislative text and vocal Republican opposition to any efforts to violate the law. So down the line, yes or no, do you agree that the Trump administration should stop its targeted attacks on wind and solar? Yes or no? Should they stop it?
Senator Kelly,
Markey?
Senator Markey, excuse me.
All
Senator,
Irish. We all look at the Irish.
apologies, Senator. Senator Markey, rather than commenting on any one specific kind of project, the point for the Business Roundtable is that it needs to be predictable and the permits need to stand once issued.
Right, but that's not predictable. They've already permitted. Now they're canceled. Okay, Mr. Booker, yes or no?
Yes.
Okay, Mr. Meyer.
Senator Markey, as I did mention to Senator Padilla, I'm not close enough to that issue to have a firm opinion on it, but we are an all of the above organization and all of the reforms
I
that.
don't, okay, Ms. Hopper?
Unequivocally, yes.
Yes, thank you.
Yes, for fully permitted projects.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, we can't even get the top secret briefing on what the national security issue is, you know, that is blocking it. They won't even give us the briefing so we can know. Although I suspect it's you got to take down the wind turbines so they can bring the aircraft carriers up to Greenland to attack, okay? They don't want those obstacles in the water. So down the line, permitting reform without project uncertainty is meaningless. And right now, the call for uncertainty is coming from inside the White House. So if Republicans want to make permits great again, the Trump administration could end this permitting chaos and uncertainty for offshore wind and renewable energy right now. But if projects like offshore wind or clean energy projects can be stalled or stopped entirely by the executive branch on a whim, it stands to reason that fossil fuel projects can get the same treatment in the future by a Democratic administration. The right has given the left a very good playbook. Mr. Mayor, are you aware that some policymakers and environmental organizations are planning for how this administration's restrictive permitting framework could be applied to oil, gas, and pipeline projects in future administrations?
Thank you, Mr. Senator. We are aware that that's part of the conversation.
Yeah. So, Madam Chair, what I would ask is unanimous consent to enter a memo from Evergreen Action on this issue into the record, which shows how the Interior Department's July 15th memo to block solar and wind projects could be repurposed to block oil, gas, and pipeline projects.
Without objection, those have been blocked in the past, as you know.
And Mr. Mayor, is it fair to say the oil and gas industry would not want any White House Republican or Democrat to require the Interior Secretary's personal signature for every stage of a project review?
Again, Mr. Senator, we are supportive of the permit certainty provisions. It is also true that we've had our own difficult experiences across different agencies in previous administrations, and so that's why we continue to be an all-of-the-above organization, and all of our reforms would benefit energy resources equally.
Yeah, the problem is we're in an oil above all era, not an all of the above era, okay? And we can see that from Venezuela to all of the public decisions that have been made by the administration. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Senator Lummis.
Okay. Thank you, Madam Chairman. Mr. Markey, we feel your pain. We could take your statement and where you said left, we could put right. Where you said right, we could put left. Where you said Trump, we could put Biden. Where you said Biden, we could put Trump. Where you said oil and gas, we could put, say, cold and wind, solar and wind. I mean, under the Biden administration, one of the first things he did was nix the Keystone XL pipeline. And just like Mr. Booker said, there were union jobs working on that pipeline. There was pipe sitting next to an open trench ready to install. There were people who lost their jobs on the spot, just the way you described because of what President Biden did. And now the converse is happening with some renewable energy types. So we're in the same boat now. We have seen a Democrat administration under President Biden do the same thing that now you're complaining about. So what we do need is some certainty. And here's what I'm wondering. So here's what I want to talk to the panel about. Is there a difference between a small project?
I just want to add that Biden permitted public land, oil and gas permits faster during his 4 years on public lands than Trump did.
That
during
is
his
not
first 4
true.
years. It is
Come to
abs-
Alaska.
It's
That's
100%
zero.
true.
Wait a
And
minute.
the country.
It's Senator Lummis's time.
Yeah, and I would also point out that during that same time, quarterly oil and gas lease sales on public land were put a moratorium on them, contrary to federal law, and that the no coal on federal land, which is basically where all the coal in Wyoming comes from, was permitted. I mean, this is an apples to oranges, both sides treating the source of energy exactly the opposite. So here's what I'm wondering. If it's a small-scale project, should there be a different permitting process than for an industrial-scale project? Let me give you an example. So in my lifetime, I have seen a massive difference in the footprint of oil and gas on the surface of the ground because of horizontal drilling. You know, you used to have a lot more surface disturbance to produce the same amount of oil and gas. But when horizontal drilling became a thing, there's very little surface disturbance. The exact opposite has happened with wind and solar. The scale of these industrial wind projects and the industrial solar projects is massive. They are huge. And in a state like Wyoming, for example, we recently had a proposal for a wind project that covered 48,000 acres. Now, even in my big state, this is a massive scale of surface disturbance because there are all these little roads between every wind turbine, and we've had massive scale solar projects. Now, in our very thin topsoil, if you put down these blankets of solar panels where the sun can't shine through, two things happen. The soil doesn't grow anything, so the wind erosion in our tremendously windy state is blowing away what little topsoil we have under a 30-year permitted solar project. And the amount of fire prevention roads that have to be installed around an industrial scale solar project is massive because they tend to catch on fire. So there are environmental consequences that have, I think, in a lot of ways during my lifetime, tipped the scale to where what we need to be looking at in one way is just the scale of the permit. Is it 10 acres or 20 acres, or is it 48,000 acres? And if it is a small-scale project in terms of surface disturbance, we should have an expedited permitting process that doesn't go to the level of the Secretary of the Interior. But if it is an industrial-scale project of any kind, whether it's oil and gas or coal or wind or solar, maybe it should rise to the scale of the Secretary. Any comments?
I got a lot of comments. If I can. I mean, when it comes to, look, we're all looking about predictability, whether it's large scale or small scale, it doesn't matter. We should allow for developers to determine, does it make sense to have a solar or wind farm in your state or any other state, not people sitting around this table to say, picking winners and losers. We are all of the above. We believe in wind and solar. We believe in nuclear. We believe in pipelines. We believe in natural gas. We believe in coal. We believe that those energy sources are what we need, and we believe in a predictable permitting process that allows, not just for energy infrastructure either. Right now, now, gateway tunnels, in the winds, sitting down the street of Pennsylvania Avenue, whether or not that project, an infrastructure project, a tunnel project in New York City, is going to be allowed to continue being built, where I have 400, 500, 600 members right now. So we got to take politics out of all of this. We've got to let the regulators regulate. We got to let keep the politicians out of this and have predictability, get rid of this chaos, and create jobs for Americans, create jobs for our members, create jobs for your constituents.
Well said, Mr. Booker. I yield back.
Thank you. Sullivan, yeah. Senator Schiff, yeah. I'm looking for Kelly here, but he's not.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And first of all, thank you for the work you're doing with Senator Whitehouse on reform. I think we're vitally in need of permitting reform and appreciate all the bipartisan work that's gone into it. I have the same concern that Senator Whitehouse does with the cancellation of billions of dollars of renewable energy projects in California. One of them alone, the cancellation of Arches, for example, was expected to support over 220,000 jobs. That's quite devastating, and it will be hard, I think, for us to get to yes on a permitting reform if we think that permitting reform is going to be used in a way that is prejudicial either against states or that favors only one source of energy, that being fossil fuels, to the expense of all others. And so I think it's going to be necessary to have some restoration of confidence that the permitting reform will be used in an even-handed basis and not the subject of state-by-state discrimination. But let me just turn to what I think is going to really propel an increase in energy costs if we don't address it, and that is we have all these data centers coming online. We are expecting year after year significant increases in energy demand, electricity demand in particular, and we have to meet that demand, and we're taking a lot of projects that would meet that demand off the grid. There are certainly critical issues in, for example, reducing the queue to get on the grid and to make sure that we're pursuing projects in a timely way. But if we're taking whole sources of energy offline at a time of vastly increasing demand, then consumers can't help but see their prices skyrocket, and they've already gone up 13% in the course of the last year. So I welcome your thoughts, both on the need to make sure that we can get new projects online more quickly, but also how we really can't be excluding whole sectors of energy when so much of the new energy coming online is renewable. To be cutting that off in the face of dramatically increased demand is just going to push prices higher. So welcome your thoughts on any of the above.
Yeah, thank you, Senator. I'm happy to take the first crack at that. So I couldn't agree more that speed is critical, and that I think the data centers that are demanding more electricity would agree with me that speed is critical. And all of us here represent all of the above, most of the above, particular industries, whatever, but we would all agree that speed and predictability matter. Solar and storage are the fastest to build right now. That is not a political statement, that is merely a factual statement in terms of our supply chain, sort of how quickly we can get things permitted. And so we should continue to do that. And to take that off the table means higher prices for
No, some of the
ratepayers.
counterpoint made by the administration is, well, that's not reliable, it's not all the time. Now, the storage, I would imagine, addresses some of that, but how would you respond to that argument?
Yeah, thank you for asking me, because I get that question a lot. And you are right that storage is a critical element of this, that having the ability to store those electrons when the sun is shining so brightly is important, and that it can discharge later. In my testimony, you'll see a really lovely graph from Texas, of all places, about the impact not only of availability of electrons, but the price of electrons during peak days. So it compares 2022 to 2025. And because there was more solar and storage on the grid in Texas, not only was there reliability, but there was also much, much lower prices during peak time.
Thank you.
I
Any
might
others?
add, if you don't mind, you know, demand is growing so rapidly, so it's absolutely a critical question. We're going to need all resources. About 43% of U.S. electricity generation comes from natural gas. And so we believe strongly that we're going to need a lot more of that capacity as well, not only on the generation side, but on the infrastructure side to make sure that we can move the gas from where it's produced to where it's in demand. And so that's a big emphasis of our permitting reform priorities as well.
Thank you.
Senator Schiff, if I could just add, the McKinsey report studying the potential benefits of permit reform that I included in my testimony makes the compelling point, with a lot of very compelling data, that better permitting would actually reduce U.S. greenhouse gas emissions significantly, and that you know, as part of that, that we shouldn't discriminate between energy sources.
And what accounts for that, if you would?
It has a lot to do with the fact that permit delays carry their own environmental costs, with deferring projects that, in general, are going to be reducing pollution. They're going to be using inputs more efficiently, and they'll be bringing new electrons onto the grid.
Thank you very much.
Let me just say, with the data center, that's an important thing that we're going to have to figure out together. That it takes power to build them, and we can't not build them. We have to stay globally competitive, and we need to bring those stakeholders together. That you bring, you know, the power companies with the data centers, with labor, with the community, to figure out how do we do this together so that we have, whether it's small modular reactors, whether it's renewables, whether it's gas, whatever that power source is that we're bringing that power at the same time, so we're not raising these rates for the ratepayers, and we're able to stay globally competitive in the data center race.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
The order is Ricketts, Kelly, Sullivan.
Great, thank you very much. Thank you, Ranking Member Sheldon, White House, and also for Chairman Capito. I've actually just got a few minutes because I got to get to the floor to go preside, so I'll be really brief. Thank you to our witnesses here. When I was governor of Nebraska, I actually implemented Lean Six Sigma as part of our overall strategy in government, but it worked very well with streamlining our processes in permitting. We took, for example, our air construction permits was 110 steps long. We cut it down to 22 steps, and we're able to cut the time from 198 days down to 65 days. So I think there's an opportunity here as well to be able, across all to be able to streamline what we're doing in permitting in a lot of ways that don't impact any sort of environmental standards. Nebraskans from across all industries, especially if you're thinking about construction, transportation, agriculture, have all advocated for common sense reform to our permitting process because it does take too long, as you've all highlighted. Process improvements can be continuous. They're not. Every single industry benefits from efficient and predictable regulation. Efficient, predictable regulatory frameworks drive down costs. Mr. Bechtel, you were just talking about also driving down greenhouse gases, puts more money back in people's pockets, and it's how we restore our cost effectiveness. In Nebraska, this looks like timely approvals for roads, utility projects, pipelines, and all the essentials that go into economic growth and infrastructure development. And we also talked about certainty of project development. Agree with that 100%. It's essential for ensuring projects not only begin but are completed with the permits that are issued, and to providing certainty. We also need to make sure we're doing it on lawsuit reform, enforcement of timelines, interagency collaboration. All of this is critical as Congress takes up this issue. These changes ultimately will save time and taxpayer dollars, all while maintaining environmental standards. And to my colleagues on the other side of the aisle, just to add to, again, the Keystone Pipeline was canceled in Nebraska. I recall being at the front end of this project even before I was governor of Nebraska. Those jobs were good union jobs, Mr. Booker, that were paying some of them over $100 an hour. It was really, really good jobs that got canceled because Joe Biden canceled the permit. So again, predictability, I agree with as well. Sadly, I don't have any time to ask questions because I've got to get to the floor. But again, thank you all for being here today to help us with this very important process.
Senator Sullivan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I really want to thank the witnesses here. I think this is one of the most important hearings of the year, certainly in this committee it is, because I think we have a great opportunity as a bipartisan group of witnesses. I want to thank Mr. Bechtel, Mr. Meyer for all you're doing for American energy. I really want to thank Mr. Booker for all you're doing for American energy and Alaska energy. The laborers up in my great state are just essential, right? Building out America, building out Alaska. Matter of fact, one of my first op-eds that I had as a new U.S. Senator in the Hill magazine, Hill newspaper, I wrote with Terry O'Sullivan, the great former, now you're the great current LIUNA president, but this is all about permanent reform and how important it is to energy, infrastructure, and number one, jobs, good jobs. So I'm going to show you just something real quick to make the point, Senator Markey, because what Senator Markey was saying, no offense, I'm friends with Senator Markey, was baloney, right? This is what my state endured. 70 executive orders and executive actions singularly focused on Alaska. We have the back to show all the, well, there's 7-0. Singularly focused on my state to shut it down, oil, gas, you name it, everything by President Biden. Alaska was the #1 target. And you think that killed jobs? Mr. Booker, it did, trust me, a lot of your members. So then President Trump comes in, which was great, because I asked him, Mr. President, you got to get rid of Biden's EOs that are crushing my state's economy. And by the way, killing American energy, right? That's not good. Biden was sanctioning Alaska more than he sanctioned Iran and Venezuela, the oil and gas. That's a fact. So President Trump comes in and he says, no, I'm going to unleash Alaska. Day one, I get this great executive order that is trying to reverse all the Biden stuff. So I appreciate the president and his team. By the way, the one state for Senator Markey that did do great during Biden was New Mexico, because the senior senator from New Mexico, I'm sure, got in Deb Haaland's ear, the Secretary of Interior from New Mexico. They got more than half of all federal drilling permits. Shut down Alaska, drill baby drill in New Mexico because it was a Democrat state. Pure and simple politics. So a little bit of crocodile tears over there on the other side. And Senator Whitehouse is one of my best friends in the Senate, but no offense, man. This is what goes around comes around, and you're getting a little taste of the medicine Alaska's gotten by Democrats. So, but here's the point, and I'm going to ask questions. We have a great opportunity to stop this, like, you know, pendulum. My state now, we got a president and administration that's trying to help everything on permitting. The previous administration targeted us #1, more than terrorist states. So what we need is permitting reform in the law. And this is the moment. And I think it's a great opportunity for all of us. And I think Senator Whitehouse would agree. So let me ask Mr. Booker, Mr. Bechtel, you keep talking about certainty, timelines. There's a lot of ways to do that. There's litigation certainty. You talk about 28% of all projects get delayed up to 4 years just by litigation in your testimony. Mr. Booker, you are constantly talking about, I need secure timelines that we can agree on. So what are and when you guys are looking for certainty, what are the top ones that you want us to focus on? And to Mr. Booker, if we get permitting reform in the law, do you have any doubt that that will create more jobs, not less jobs? So why don't you start with that question, and then to both of you, and maybe Mr. Meyer as well, the key elements of certainty. What are the top ones? Because there's judicial reform, there's litigation reform, there's standing, there's federal agencies, moving them out on a quicker timeline. What do you guys think is the key thing? And it's really important. We had a bunch of our building trades that I called for an informal meeting just a couple weeks ago to say, what do you guys need? Because this is the moment. I've been working on this issue since I got here 11 years ago, and we have the moment. Let's do it. So, Mr. Booker.
The first question's easy. Yeah, permitting reform is going to create more jobs. And Brendan testified to it earlier of a couple of $1 trillion hanging in the balance because of waiting for permits. So if we get rid of, some of those, not get rid of the regulations, but if we streamline and make it easier to get these in a streamlined process, it's obviously going to create more jobs. Probably the #1 thing for LIUNA and for our members is the Section 401 water quality certification. And to get some certainty around that, because right now the current system just allows for that certification go to the states, and depending on the color of the state, depending on the type of the energy, depends on whether or not you get a permit or not. So let's get some certainty around that. Give us a yes or a no. And if the answer is no, tell us why, so that then we can reapply. If the answer is yes, then let's go build it. Right now, we don't get an answer, which means the projects aren't being built, which is why there's $2.5 trillion hanging in the balance of capital that's ready to be invested in this country.
Great. Mr. Bechtel, in terms of certainty, what are your priorities?
Yeah, Senator Sullivan, I'll do the speed round on this. The full details in the BRT report that I submitted with my testimony. There's four things. The first is redundancy, get rid of it. We're studying the same environmental impact 3, 4, 5 times across different agencies. It's not thorough, it's wasteful. Typically, you've got to go through a state process. The state regulators are creating really good data. Can we just use that same data and not have to recreate it 3, 4, 5 different times for different agencies? The second are deadlines. Right now, there's no consequence for agencies that sit on permit applications. Solution, 90 days after an EIS or EIA has been issued, you get a no or it defaults to yes.
Yeah.
If there's no answer in 90 days, the default should be yes. That's reasonable, that's achievable, it drives accountability. Modernize the process. We're using a 1970s playbook for 21st century infrastructure. We should be using the categorical exclusions we have more consistently. We should be using programmatic reviews the way they were intended. Our competitors like China aren't waiting right now.
Yeah.
We should be either. And then the last thing, I know this is something you're particularly passionate about, sir, but litigation. I shared the statistics already. I talked earlier, average litigation delay is 4.2 years. On average, construction costs go up about 40% over those 4 years. There's a tremendous amount of, yes, private capital, but also taxpayer dollars being destroyed as part of that delay. And 80% of those times in those cases, the agency's permits stand as issued.
Yeah.
So what are we doing here?
Thank you. And just real quick, Mr. Chairman, some of you know that Donlin Mine, that's one of the biggest gold mines. We've been trying to get that permitted in Alaska. It's a great opportunity now. There's a lot of great investors. 6 years after the EPA and Army Corps issued a Clean Water 404 permit, 6 years, a group of far-left environmentalists sued, and now it's in litigation. I mean, can you believe that? It's just crazy. James Callahan, the head of the operating engineer, said NEPA has evolved into a massive edifice capable of destroying project after project, destroying not helping job after job in virtually every sector of the economy. We need to fix it. This is our great bipartisan opportunity to do so. And Mr. Chairman, I'd like to submit for the record this outstanding op-ed in the Hill newspaper by Terry O'Sullivan and Dan Sullivan many years ago on the need for permitting reform, showing the LIUNA Senate agreement on this important issue.
Without objection.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
That concludes the hearing. So on behalf of the chair, who had to go to another commitment, and paren, by the way, I hope you think it's a minor good sign that the chair feels comfortable enough about the ranking member to let me close out the hearing. This is part of the bipartisanship that is alive and well in this committee. So let me, on behalf of the chair, thank all the witnesses and all my colleagues for participating in today's hearing. Note that senators who wish to submit written questions for the record have until 5:00 p.m. on Wednesday, February 11th to do so. Note that the witnesses' responses to those questions are due back to the committee no later than 5 p.m. on Wednesday, February 25th, 2 weeks later, and will be submitted for the record. With that, this hearing is adjourned.